there exists a universe where heroism has become mundane, where the extraordinary is so routine that it borders on the absurd, where a man can shatter mountains with a single punch and still worry about missing a supermarket sale on premium beef. This is the world of Saitama, a place of colorful monsters and theatrical villains, a reality where threats emerge daily, only to be dispatched with such casual efficiency that boredom becomes the hero's greatest enemy. Picture him now standing in a cramped apartment, staring at a flickering television, one hand absently scratching his bald head. His yellow suit hangs nearby, clean but unremarkable. Outside, the city hums with ordinary chaos. Grocery stores advertise discounts. Salarymen rush to catch trains. Children play in parks under a sun that sets with predictable beauty. Saitama's universe is defined by its lightness. Even its darkness carries a comedic undertone. Even its despair feels temporary. He has saved this world so many times that gratitude has transformed into routine. He is a god walking among mortals, and the weight of that divinity has become tiresome. On this particular afternoon, a monster emerges from the city's industrial district. Nothing remarkable. A creature of moderate size, composed of shifting geometric patterns, bellowing incomprehensible threats about dimensional supremacy. The Hero Association dispatches alerts. Citizens evacuate with practiced efficiency. And Saitama arrives, late as always, having taken a wrong turn at an intersection he's passed 1,000 times. The monster sees him, laughs, declares itself the herald of the infinite threshold, a being capable of unraveling the fabric of space-time itself. It speaks of powers beyond comprehension, of realities folding into themselves, of cosmic significance that transcends mortal understanding. Saitama yawns. He steps forward, pulling back his fist with the same energy someone might use to swat a persistent fly. There's no dramatic build-up, no transformation sequence, no inner monologue about protecting those he loves. Just a simple, clean punch, delivered with the enthusiasm of a man completing a chore. The impact is immediate. The monster disintegrates, but something else happens. Something unprecedented. The shockwave doesn't dissipate. Instead, it ripples outward, distorting light, bending sound, creating a cascading effect that even Saitama notices. He pauses, fist still extended, watching as the air itself seems to tear. Not violently, not with the theatrical drama of a portal opening in fantasy films, but quietly, inevitably, like a curtain being drawn aside by an invisible hand. Reality fractures. A void opens behind him, silent, absolute, and undeniable. Saitama turns, curious rather than concerned, and before he can fully process what's happening, the tear expands. It doesn't pull him in with violent force. It simply encompasses him, like stepping from a lit room into darkness. One moment he exists in his universe. The next he doesn't. The tear seals. The city returns to normal. The hero is gone. And somewhere impossibly far away, across dimensions that should not intersect, a very different universe begins to detect an anomaly. Welcome to the 41st millennium, a place where hope is not merely scarce, it is actively hunted, where light exists only as a weapon, wielded by those who have forgotten what warmth feels like, where peace is not a goal but a myth, spoken of in ancient texts that most believe were fabricated to control the desperate. This is a universe built on the corpse of dreams. A galaxy where humanity clings to survival through faith in a rotting god emperor, where alien horrors wait in every shadow, where the afterlife itself is a dimension of literal conscious evil. Here, in the cold void between stars, something impossible drifts. Saitama floats unconscious through space, his yellow suit somehow intact, his expression peaceful even in the vacuum. He moves slowly toward the edge of Imperial territory, pulled by gravitational currents he cannot perceive, approaching a civilization that will not understand him, that cannot understand him. The contrast is absolute. A god of comedy entering a universe of horror. A man defined by his overwhelming power meeting a reality where power is measured in suffering. A being of pure physical law about to collide with a dimension where physics bends to emotion, where belief shapes reality, where the immaterial devours the material. Somewhere in the darkness, sensors begin to ping. An Imperial vessel, one of the dreaded black ships that scour the galaxy for dangerous psychers, detects biological readings where none should exist. The crew exchanges nervous glances. Protocols are initiated. Weapons systems hum to life. And Saitama continues to drift, dreaming perhaps of simpler things. Of Salispunto. Of rivals worth fighting. Of a world where the greatest challenge was finding anything that could make him feel truly alive again. He is about to get his wish, though not in any way he could possibly anticipate. The oath of vigilance cut through the void like a blade through flesh-black hull adorned with Gothic architecture, gun batteries bristling like the quills of some ancient predator. It was a black ship, one of the Imperium's most feared vessels, tasked with a purpose that made even hardened soldiers whisper prayers of protection. These ships hunted witches, psychers, those cursed individuals whose minds touched the warp, that hellish dimension where nightmares lived and thought had physical consequence. The ship's interior was a cathedral of paranoia, every surface inscribed with protective wards. Every corridor monitored by sanctioned psychers bound in service, their third eyes tattooed shut, their minds shackled to the Emperor's will. These psychers existed in constant agony, filtering the screams of the warp so that normal humans could navigate the galaxy without their souls being devoured. On this rotation, the psychic choir detected something impossible. It began as a whisper in their collective consciousness, not a presence, but an absence, a void where something should exist but didn't. The sensation was so foreign that several psychers initially believed their augments had malfunctioned. But the feeling intensified, a blank space in reality, drifting closer to their position, biological but somehow empty. The choir's leader, a woman whose eyes had been ritually replaced with cybernetic sensors, transmitted her findings to the bridge with trembling hands. Inquisitor Valdane, we have detected an unidentified biological entity bearing 173 Mark 6. It registers as human baseline, but, she paused, struggling with terminology that didn't exist in Imperial lexicon. There is no psychic signature, no warp presence, not shielded, not hidden, simply absent. Inquisitor Valdane stood from his command throne, a towering figure wrapped in powered armor older than some planetary civilizations. His face was a roadmap of scars, each one earned in service to the Golden Throne. He had fought demons that spoke in mathematics, purged worlds where reality had become negotiable, executed saints and sinners with equal efficiency when the Imperium's survival demanded it. But this report made his augmented heart rate spike. "Clarify," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "No warp presence means untouchable, pariah, blank. The entity should register as a psychic null zone." "Negative, my lord." The psycher's voice cracked. "It is not repellent. It is simply not there. As if the entity exists in a state our perceptions cannot properly categorize." Valdane's mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. A new Xenos subspecies capable of masking its warp signature. A Necron experiment? A manifestation from the Tyrannid hive mind testing new evolutionary adaptations? Or worse, a warp entity so sophisticated it could disguise itself as biological? "Retrieve it," he ordered. "Full containment protocols, null field restraints. If it shows any hostility, authorized weapon-free elimination." The crew mobilized with practiced efficiency. A retrieval team suited in reinforced void armor launched from the hangar bay, their weapons blessed by the ship's priest, their armor inscribed with litanies of protection. They found the entity exactly where the psychers predicted: a bald man in a yellow suit, floating peacefully in the void, completely exposed to vacuum and radiation that should have flash-frozen his tissues. He was breathing, not struggling, not protected by visible technology, just breathing, as if space itself had forgotten to kill him. The retrieval team worked in silence, their religious terror overriding curiosity. They encased the entity in a stasis field and transported it to the ship's containment, leveler section of the vessel designed to hold horrors that could kill with thought alone. Saitama woke slowly, consciousness returning like the tide. His first sensation was discomfort, the kind that comes from sleeping in an awkward position. His second was confusion. The last thing he remembered was throwing a punch. Now he was in what appeared to be a metal room with walls covered in strange symbols, glowing faintly with sickly green light. He sat up, looking around with mild curiosity. The room was small, roughly 3 meters square, with a single reinforced door and no windows. He could hear distant sounds, machinery humming, voices speaking in a language he didn't recognize, the occasional clang of metal on metal. "Hello?" he called out, his voice calm and slightly apologetic. I think there's been some kind of mistake. Outside the containment cell, alarms screamed. The psychic choir recoiled as if struck. Several psychers collapsed, blood streaming from their noses. The entity had spoken, and its voice carried no warp resonance, no psychic echo. It was simply a voice. But the absence of expected supernatural properties triggered defensive reflexes in minds trained to detect the immaterial. Valdane rushed to the observation deck, staring through armored glass at the bald man sitting cross-legged on the cell floor, looking confused and slightly bored. Subject has regained consciousness, a servitor droned, its human components lobotomized centuries ago. Vital stable, no detectable mutations, no technological augments. Classification, unknown. Run full spectrum analysis, Valdane ordered. Genetic sequencing. Radiation exposure. Chemical composition. I want to know what this thing is. But even as the instruments buzzed to life, Valdane felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of service. Genuine uncertainty. The entity looked human, sounded human, but its very existence violated fundamental laws of how reality operated in the 41st millennium. And in a universe where the impossible was merely improbable, that made it the most dangerous thing he'd ever encountered. The interrogation chamber was designed to break both body and spirit. Overhead lights cast harsh shadows across walls etched with high Gothic prayers. Restraint systems hummed with barely contained power, capable of holding gene-enhanced warriors or rogue psychers with equal efficiency. The air itself tasted of recycled fear, decades of suffering compressed into atmosphere. Saitama sat in the central restraint chair, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Not because of the ominous surroundings or the three inquisitors arrayed before him like judges at some cosmic tribunal. He was uncomfortable because the metal seat was cold and the armrests were positioned at an awkward height. He shifted slightly, trying to find a position that didn't make his lower back ache. Inquisitor Valdane stood closest, flanked by two colleagues whose specializations covered different aspects of potential threat. To his left, Inquisitor Heleth, an expert in biological mutations and Xenos contamination, her augmented eyes capable of detecting genetic drift invisible to standard equipment. To his right, Interrogator Kavasha, sanctioned psyker whose mind had been fortified with psychic barriers so dense he could stare into the warp without flinching. "State your name," Valdane began, his voice carrying the mechanical undertone of his Vox-enhanced vocal cords.
Saitama.
The bald man replied politely, his tone suggesting he was answering a question about favorite foods rather than being interrogated by transhuman inquisitors capable of ordering planetary extinction. Designation? Hero? Imperial designation? Planetary registry code? Genetic lineage documentation? Saitama blinked. "I don't think I have any of those things. I'm from City Z. Is this some kind of military base? Because I think there's been a mistake. I was just fighting a monster and then..." Silence. Valdane's command carried psychic weight, a technique that usually rendered subjects mute and compliant. Saitama paused mid-sentence, not from compulsion but from basic politeness. When he realized the Inquisitor expected continued silence, he simply waited, hands folded in his lap. Heleth leaned forward, her mechanical eyes whirring as they focused. Genetic scan indicates baseline human within acceptable parameters, but tolerance for vacuum exposure, radiation resistance, and cellular integrity suggest impossible augmentation. What is your point of origin? I told you, City Z. It's what planet, what system, what segmentum. I don't know what those words mean. The Inquisitors exchanged glances weighted with significance. A human who didn't know basic Imperial geography, who spoke Gothic the common tongue with perfect fluency but claimed ignorance of fundamental terminology, who survived hard vacuum without protection. Kavash stepped forward, his psychic hood crackling with barely contained energy. "I will examine his mind directly. If he is hiding information, I will extract it. If he is corrupted, I will know." "Is that really necessary?" Saitama asked, genuine concern entering his voice. Not for himself, but with the same energy someone might use when asking if surgery was truly required for a minor headache. Kavash didn't respond. He placed both hands on Saitama's temples, his consciousness diving forward with the force of a psychic battering ram. He had broken into demonic minds, navigated the twisted labyrinths of chaos cultists, stripped secrets from Xenos that thought in colors humans had no names for. He touched Saitama's mind and felt nothing. Not resistance, Not emptiness in the way a blank would project. Just the simple, unshakable presence of a mind thinking about whether he'd remembered to turn off his apartment's air conditioning before being transported. The psychic probe didn't bounce off. It didn't penetrate. It simply found nothing to grasp. Kavash pushed harder, channeling more power, drawing on reserves that made nearby candles flicker. His psychic presence manifested as crushing weight, a technique that usually forced traumatic memories to surface involuntarily. Saitama's mind remained peaceful, unaffected, like trying to crush water with your bare hands. The backlash came suddenly. Kavash's own psychic energy, having nowhere to go, nowhere to anchor, rebounded with catastrophic force. He screamed, staggering backward, blood streaming from his eyes and nose. Nearby servitors sparked and died. Emergency wards blazed to life across the chamber walls. Saitama looked concerned. "Are you okay? Do you need medical attention?" The psyker collapsed unconscious before he hit the floor. Helith rushed to his side, injecting emergency stimulants while barking orders at crew members flooding into the chamber. Valdane remained motionless, his enhanced mind processing the impossible scenario. A psychic probe had failed. Not been resisted failed. As if the target simply existed in a state where psychic interaction was meaningless. "What are you?" Valdane asked quietly, the question carrying more weight than any previous command. Saitama considered the question seriously. "I'm just a guy who's a hero for fun. I did some training, 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, and a 10-kilometer run. Every day for 3 years. And then I became really strong. That's pretty much it." The Inquisitors stared at him. "That is not possible," Helith said flatly. "Physical conditioning cannot produce immunity to psychic examination, cannot grant vacuum survival, cannot— "Yeah, I get that a lot," Saitama interrupted gently. "People always say it's impossible, but I'm here, so I guess it worked." Valdane made a decision. He activated his Vox link, speaking directly to the ship's commander. "Initiate Protocol Omega. Subject is beyond standard classification. Prepare for enhanced containment measures and priority transmission to Sector Command. This entity represents either an unprecedented opportunity or an existential threat." "Which do you believe it is, Inquisitor?" The commander's voice crackled back. Valdane looked at the bald man sitting calmly in the restraint chair, asking again if anyone needed water or perhaps a snack because this seemed like it was taking a while. "I don't know," Valdane admitted, the confession tasting like poison. "And that terrifies me more than any demon I've ever faced." The stratagem of the Oath of Vigilance had become an ideological battlefield. Hololithic displays flickered around the central table, showing rotating images of Saitama from multiple angles, biometric readings that refused to make sense, genetic sequences that coded as human yet demonstrated impossible characteristics, psychic resonance scans that returned only errors. Inquisitor Valdane stood at one end of the table, his augmented frame casting shadows across tactical displays. Across from him, Inquisitor Helith had abandoned her usual clinical demeanor, her mechanical eyes locked in heated debate with Inquisitor Interrogator Matthias, who had arrived via emergency teleportation from a nearby sector fleet. Matthias represented the radical faction, those within the Inquisition who believed that understanding chaos, Xenos technology, and forbidden knowledge was essential to humanity's survival. He was younger than his colleagues, his face unscarred, his armor adorned with symbols that traditionalists found disturbingly close to heretical. "We cannot destroy this entity without understanding it," Matthias argued, his voice carrying the passion of ideological certainty. "It demonstrates capabilities beyond our current theoretical frameworks. If we can study it, replicate even a fraction of its resistance to warp phenomena, we could develop weapons against chaos itself. And damn ourselves in the process," Helith countered, her voice cold as void-frozen metal. "Your faction always believes the next forbidden technology will save us, always certain that dancing with damnation will somehow preserve the Imperium. This entity defies classification because it should not exist. That alone marks it for destruction." Valdane listened, his centuries of experience allowing him to see merit and danger in both positions. The radical approach had produced innovations that saved billions. It had also created tragedies that consumed entire sectors. The Puritan doctrine preserved humanity's soul at the cost of innovation. Both paths led to survival. Both paths led to extinction. "What does the entity want?" he asked, cutting through the philosophical debate with practical inquiry. The chamber fell silent. It wants... Helith consulted her data slate. To go home. It has requested this approximately 47 times. It has also asked about the availability of food sales, the location of something called supermarkets, and whether we've seen any strong opponents lately. Matthias leaned forward. Does it show hostility? Negative. All interactions have been cordial to the point of disconcerting. It apologizes when guards enter the room. It asked one servitor if its cybernetic augmentation was painful and whether it could help. And the incident with the Psyker. Not aggressive action, Valdane confirmed. Interrogator Cavish's psychic probe simply failed. The backlash was self-inflicted, caused by his own power rebounding. Matthias gestured to a hololithic replay of the incident. Look at this, an entity that negates psychic interaction through pure existence. Not a blank, which repels the warp. Not a demon, which manipulates it. Something else entirely. Which makes it a threat, Helith insisted. We classify threats based on understanding. If we cannot understand it, we cannot predict it. If we cannot predict it, an alarm interrupted her. Not the standard klaxon of combat stations, but a deeper sound, resonant with dread. The kind of alarm that indicated structural integrity breach. The stratagem doors burst open. A guardsman stumbled in, his uniform disheveled, his eyes wide with the kind of shock that came from witnessing something fundamentally wrong with reality. Report, Valdane commanded. The guardsman struggled to speak. Sir. The entity, it was asking to use lavatory facilities. We denied the request, per containment protocols. It became mildly frustrated and... It pushed on the door. Sir. Define pushed. The guardsman's voice cracked. It touched the reinforced blast hatch, barely applied pressure. The door, 40 centimeters of consecrated adamantium, blessed by 3 tech priests, reinforced with field generators, it tore free from its housing and flew approximately 20 meters down the corridor, embedding itself into a support bulkhead. The stratagem fell silent. What was the entity's reaction? Matthias asked, his academic fascination overriding appropriate fear. It apologized, sir, profusely. Said it didn't know its own strength and offered to help repair the damage. Helith pulled up security footage. The recording showed exactly what the guardsman described: Saitama pushing gently on the door with one hand, the expression on his face more confused than anything, the massive door tearing free and sailing down the corridor with enough force to dent reinforced steel. And then Saitama's face, genuinely apologetic, asking the stunned guards if they had a maintenance crew he could talk to. Emperor preserve us, someone whispered. Valdane made a decision. Increase containment to level Omega. Deploy suppression servitors. Activate defensive wards. And transmit the following message to Sector Command Priority Maximus. Inquisitorial override Valdane Theta 9. Message begins. Have encountered entity of unknown origin demonstrating physical capabilities beyond classification. Entity shows no hostile intent but represents destabilization risk to Imperial security doctrine. Requesting guidance on classification and disposal protocols. You're calling for its execution, Matthias said. Not quite a question. I'm calling for a decision above my authority, Valdane corrected. Because if we make the wrong choice here, if we kill something that could have saved humanity or preserve something that could damn us. He gestured to the frozen image of Saitama on the hololithic display, a bald man in a yellow suit, looking mildly concerned about a broken door. We need wisdom greater than our own. But even as the message transmitted across the stars, Valdane knew the truth. In the Imperium of man, wisdom had long since given way to survival. And survival meant eliminating threats, regardless of what those threats actually were. The immaterium is not a place, it is a condition. A state of existence where emotion becomes geography, where thought manifests as physical law, where the boundaries between observer and observed collapse into screaming unity. This is the warp, the alternate dimension through which Imperial vessels travel, where demons breed from mortal emotion, where the dark gods rule over domains of infinite suffering. In this realm of impossible colors and screaming mathematics, something unprecedented occurred. A zone of stillness formed. Not the active calm of a psychic barrier holding back the warp's tides. Not the repellent emptiness of a blank's antipresence. Simply... cry. a sphere of space where the warp's natural chaos momentarily forgot to exist, where the screaming of tortured souls faded to whisper, where the ever-shifting landscape of nightmare solidified into something almost peaceful. The phenomenon manifested in the walk space corresponding to the Oath of Vigilance's position in real space, and the dark gods noticed. Khorne, the blood god whose throne of brass sat upon a mountain of skulls, felt the disturbance as one might feel a foreign object in their eye. In his domain of eternal warfare, where every emotion was fury and every thought was violence, the still zone registered as absence. He sent a portion of his vast consciousness to investigate, his attention like a burning lens focusing on the anomaly. What he found intrigued him. A being of pure martial potential, not a warrior driven by rage or honor or any of the emotions that typically fed his power. Simply someone strong. Impossibly strong. Strong enough that martial prowess had become boring rather than exhilarating. Khorne understood power. But power coupled with apathy. That was novel. Tzinche, the architect of fate, whose crystal labyrinth contained every possible timeline, detected the anomaly as a computational error. His consciousness, spread across 10,000 possible futures simultaneously, found a single point where probability collapsed into impossibility. A being that existed in states that should be mutually exclusive. Human but transcendent. Powerful but humble. Present but psychically absent. The paradox delighted him. Tzinche fed on change, on complexity, on the infinite permutations of cause and effect. But this entity seemed immune to change, fixed in a state of fundamental simplicity despite its cosmic implications. How does one manipulate something that has no desire to evolve? Nurgle, the plague father, whose garden of decay bloomed with every disease reality had ever conceived, found the anomaly resistant. His gifts of entropy, of blessed decay, of the peaceful acceptance of death found no purchase. The entity aged, certainly moments passed for it as they passed for all things. But corruption? Degradation. The beautiful inevitability of rot. The entity's cellular structure repaired damage faster than it could be inflicted, not through regeneration, simply through fundamental resilience. Nurgle found this neither offensive nor challenging. He simply found it curious, like discovering a single flower that refused to wilt, not through defiance but through nature. Slaanesh, the prince of pleasure, whose palace of excess contained every sensation possible and impossible, extended consciousness toward the anomaly with predatory interest. The youngest of the Chaos gods, born from the moral decay of the Eldar Empire, Slaanesh understood desire, understood the aching hunger for experience, for novelty, for something anything to make existence feel meaningful. And in the bald human floating in the still zone, Slaanesh sensed boredom. Perfect, absolute, soul-crushing boredom. The kind that came from being so powerful that challenge had become extinct. That nothing in the universe could provide the rush of genuine uncertainty, that every battle, every conflict, every potential source of excitement was known to be winnable before it began. Slaanesh reached out with tendrils of temptation, offering experiences beyond mortal ken, pleasures that would make physical sensations seem like colorless prehistory. Saitama's unconscious mind didn't respond, not with rejection. Simply with the same energy one might ignore background noise while trying to remember if they'd locked their apartment door. The four dark gods, whose existences were normally consumed with their eternal conflicts and the business of tormenting real space, simultaneously focused their attention on this anomaly. In the warp, their combined notice created ripples felt across the galaxy. Astropaths screamed in their sanctuaries, Geller fields flickered. Entire ship crews experienced sudden nightmares about a bald man in yellow. And then one of them made a decision. A minor demon of Tzinche Flamer, whose body was composed of screaming faces, and whose touch ignited change itself manifested aboard the Oath of Vigilance. The ship's Geller field should have prevented such intrusion, but the gods' combined curiosity had weakened dimensional barriers just enough for a single entity to slip through. The Flamer erupted into being on the containment level, 3 corridors from where Saitama was being held. Its presence immediately caused localized reality breakdown. Walls began to run like wax. Servitors spoke in tongues, and 3 guardsmen spontaneously combusted, their ashes reforming into symbols that hurt to perceive. Alarms screamed throughout the ship. Saitama heard the commotion. He'd been sitting quietly in his cell, trying to meditate away his growing frustration at this very confusing situation. But the sounds of screaming and the smell of something burning reached him even through reinforced walls. He stood up, stretching slightly, and walked to the cell door. "Excuse me," he called out politely. "Is everything okay out there?" The flamer rounded the corner, its body writhing with multicolored flames, its mouth screaming equations that described the death of stars. It saw Saitama through the cell's observation window and recognized him immediately as the anomaly that had drawn its master's attention. Saitama saw the demon and frowned slightly. "That looks dangerous. Are you attacking these people?" The flamer didn't answer. It couldn't, really. Demons of its tier didn't communicate so much as impose their nature on reality. It raised appendages of pure warp flame, preparing to unmake the cell wall and confront this being that had troubled the gods themselves. Saitama sighed. "I guess I have to stop you then." He flicked the cell door open not with psychic power or technological interface, but simply by pushing on the reinforced lock hard enough that the mechanism failed. The door swung outward, and Saitama stepped into the corridor, his expression mildly annoyed. The flamer launched its attack. Warp flame engulfed the corridor, temperatures exceeding anything conventional matter should survive. The flames carried mutation, carried change, carried Tzeentch's gift of transformation. Steel liquefied. Reality itself warped. When the flames cleared, Saitama stood exactly where he'd been, his suit slightly singed but otherwise unharmed. "That was rude," he said quietly. He reached forward, faster than perception could follow, and flicked the demon on what might have been its forehead. The flamer didn't explode, didn't scream, didn't dissipate according to the normal rules of demon banishment. It simply ceased. One moment, a fragment of a dark god-given terrible form. The next, nothing. Not sent back to the warp. Not disrupted. Just removed from existence with the same casual efficiency one might erase a mistake from a chalkboard. In the warp, the four dark gods recoiled. Not in pain, but in something they experienced so rarely it took them moments to classify the sensation. Uncertainty. The strike cruiser Righteous Condemnation translated from warp space like a blade through Silkit's hull black and silver, its prow adorned with the iconography of the Grey Knights chapter. These were no ordinary space marines. They were the chamber militant of the Ordo Malleus, the demon hunters, warriors whose very existence was classified beyond top secret. They were psychically attuned, spiritually fortified, and trained from childhood to fight the denizens of the warp. They had received the Oath of Vigilance's distress signal and decoded its impossible contents. Demonic incursion, entity of unknown origin, psychic anomaly, request immediate intervention. Brother Captain Arvan Stern commanded the response team, a veteran of 300 years, his armor inscribed with the true names of demons he'd banished, his force weapon humming with barely contained psychic energy. He stood in the boarding craft alongside 9 of his battle brothers, each one a living weapon consecrated to humanity's protection. "Intel summary," Stern commanded, his voice carrying the transhuman resonance of a space marine's enhanced physiology. Brother Librarian Hyperion, the team's premier psyker, consulted data feeds scrolling across his helmet display. Black ship encountered unclassified entity. Entity demonstrates physical capabilities beyond recorded baselines. Psychic examination failed with backlash. Demon manifestation occurred in proximity to entity. Demon was eliminated. Elimination method? Unknown. Security footage shows entity making physical contact with demon. Demon ceased to exist. No warp disruption recorded. No psychic signature detected. Simply termination. Stern processed this with the tactical efficiency that had kept him alive through centuries of combat. Threat assessment? Undefined. Entity shows no hostile intent toward Imperial personnel, but its mere presence appears to destabilize standard operational doctrine. Inquisitor Valdane has requested our intervention with priority Alpha Maximus coding. The boarding craft shuddered as it attached to the Oath of Vigilance's docking port. Pressure seals hissed. The Grey Knights moved with synchronized precision, their psychic hoods crackling with protective energy, their weapons loaded with sanctified ammunition designed to unmake demonic flesh. They found Saitama in a cargo bay. The black ship's crew, terrified and uncertain, had evacuated him from the containment level after he'd destroyed the demon, unsure whether he was threat or savior, but certain they didn't want him in a small enclosed space. So they directed him to one of the ship's larger holds, a space typically used for storing vehicles and heavy equipment. Saitama sat on a supply crate, swinging his legs slightly, looking profoundly bored. He noticed the Grey Knights as they entered, massive figures in Terminator armor, each one a walking fortress of ceramite and faith. For a moment, Saitama's expression brightened. "Oh hey, are you guys like superheroes? The armor is pretty cool. Is it for a convention?" The Grey Knights said nothing. Their training emphasized silence in the presence of potential corruption. They spread out with tactical precision, forming a semicircle around the bald man, weapons trained but not firing. Brother Captain Stern stepped forward, his force halberd crackling with psychic lightning. "Entity, you will submit to restraint and interrogation. Resistance will be met with terminal force. You have 5 seconds to comply." Saitama looked confused. "I already did the interrogation thing. It didn't really work. And I'm not your enemy, I just want to go home. Can you help with that?" 4 seconds. "Seriously, is this still about the door? Because I said I was sorry." 3 seconds. Saitama sighed and stood up. "Look, I don't want to fight you. You seem like you're just doing your job. But I'm not a threat, okay?" 2 seconds. "This is really unnecessary." 1. Stern made a command gesture. 2 Grey Knights moved forward, intending to apply non-lethal restraints, a psychic binding technique that would render most beings unconscious without permanent damage. Their armored hands reached for Saitama's shoulders. Saitama didn't resist. He stood still, allowing them to make contact. The psychic binding activated, channeling enough force to incapacitate a lesser demon. Saitama blinked. Did something just happen? The Grey Knights tried to push him toward restraints. They might as well have been trying to move a mountain. Saitama didn't actively resist, he simply didn't move. His body existed in a state where external force seemed meaningless. The Space Marines, each capable of punching through tank armor, applied maximum pressure. Saitama remained motionless. Frustrated, one of the knights tried a combat striker, precisely calculated blow meant to disable without killing. His power-armored fist connected with Saitama's shoulder with force enough to shatter stone. The knight's armor registered impact stress. Hairline fractures appeared in his gauntlet. Saitama rubbed his shoulder. "Oh, that actually stung a little. Please don't do that again." Brother Captain Stern made a split-second decision. He activated his psychic hood to maximum capacity and swung his force halberd in a wide arc, not to kill, but to test. The weapon blazed with warp-touched energy, a blade that could cut through reality itself when wielded by a sufficiently powerful psyker. Saitama, more from instinct than aggression, reached out and caught the halberd shaft mid-swing. The force weapon screamed. Psychic feedback surged through Stern's nervous system. The halberd, a relic weapon that had banished greater demons, simply stopped, held in place by a bald man's gentle grip. "I said I don't want to fight," Saitama repeated, a note of frustration entering his voice. He released the weapon and took a step back, but the movement, casual as it was, generated a shockwave that sent several Grey Knights stumbling. The Space Marines regrouped instantly, decades of training overriding shock. But Brother Hyperion, whose psychic senses were among the most refined in the chapter, raised a hand in a gesture of pause. "Captain," he said quietly over the team's private Vox channel, "I sense no corruption, no warp taint, no hostile intent. This entity is clean, impossibly so. It exists in a state of purity I cannot properly describe." "Then what is it?" Stern demanded, his strategic mind racing through contingencies. "I believe," Hyperion said slowly, "it is exactly what it claims to be. A man who wants to go home." The Grey Knights, bred for war, trained for millennia to fight literal evil, found themselves in a scenario their extensive conditioning hadn't prepared them for. How do you fight something that doesn't want to hurt you? How do you classify a being that breaks every rule while demonstrating no malice? How do you serve the Imperium when the Imperium's doctrines have no answer for what stands before you? Stern lowered his weapon, not in surrender, but in the first stirrings of terrible understanding. They weren't facing a threat, they were facing a question. And questions, in the 41st millennium, were often more dangerous than any weapon. The Tricorn Palace stood at the heart of Scintilla, a fortress cathedral that served as headquarters for the Calixis sector's inquisitorial operations. Its spires pierced low clouds, its halls echoed with whispered paranoia, and its chambers had witnessed decisions that damned worlds and saved billions with equal frequency. In a chamber known only by designation Omega-7, 3 High Inquisitors convened via holo-projection, their images flickering around a central table where physical evidence from the Oath of Vigilance lay displayed. Genetic samples, psychic resonance recordings, security footage, testimony from 3 separate Inquisitors and a Grey Knight's brother captain. all of it describing the impossible. High Inquisitor Covenant spoke first, an ancient woman whose body was more augmetic than flesh, sustained by technology that predated the current Imperium. We have reviewed all documentation. This entity, designation subject Omega Null, demonstrates capabilities that violate established physical and psychic law. Initial recommendations range from immediate termination to containment for study. Before we proceed, I require clarification. Brother Captain Stern, you engage this entity with full Grey Knight's combat protocols. Your assessment? Stern's hololithic image stood at attention, his armor bearing new dents from the encounter. The entity is not hostile. It demonstrated restraint even when attacked. Its capabilities exceed combat parameters we have models for. If it chose aggression, I calculate terminal casualties across any engagement scenario. So your recommendation is capitulation? Another Inquisitor demanded, his voice sharp with aristocratic disdain. My recommendation, Stern replied evenly. His wisdom. The entity has violated no Imperial law, has harmed no Imperial citizen except in self-defense, has even protected black ship crew from demonic incursion. Executing it would be murder, not justice. The chamber erupted into argument. Radical Inquisitors saw opportunity. A being that could destroy demons without psychic powers represented a potential weapon against chaos itself. Puritan Inquisitors saw heresy. Anything that defied classification was anathema, a threat to the order that kept humanity from extinction. High Inquisitor Covenant raised a skeletal hand, and silence fell. There is a third option, neither death nor indefinite containment. We test it. Test. Valdane's image leaned forward. Against what metric? Against truth. Covenant gestured, and a new hololithic display materialized, a containment facility on an uninhabited moon, where the Inquisition kept bound demons for study and training purposes. We have lesser demons in stasis, controlled environments. If this entity can destroy demonic manifestations without warp interaction, we gain invaluable data. If it fails, we have our answer about its true nature. Matthias nodded slowly. And if it succeeds? Then we face a decision that will define the sector's future. Do we classify it as weapon, ally, or threat? The vote was called. Despite ideological divisions, pragmatism won. The entity would be tested. On the research moon designated Epsilon Carthage, Saitama stood in a reinforced observation chamber, looking increasingly frustrated. They'd transported him here via heavily guarded shuttle, surrounded by Grey Knights who treated him with the wary respect normally reserved for nuclear warheads. Inquisitor Valdane watched from behind armored glass, his augmented eyes tracking every micro-expression. Subject Omega Null, you have claimed you wish only to return home. We are prepared to assist you. But first, we require demonstration of your capabilities in controlled circumstances. I already broke your door and punched a fire monster thing, Saitama replied, his tone carrying the patient exasperation of someone explaining something for the 5th time. What more do you need? Verification. We will release a bound demon in this chamber. It cannot escape the walls, or inscribed with wards blessed by the Emperor himself. You will destroy it. If you succeed, we will discuss your repatriation. Saitama's expression brightened slightly. Really? Okay. Yeah, I can do that. Just, you're sure it can't hurt anyone? The only being at risk is you. Then let's get this over with. Valdane gave the signal. Across the chamber, a containment cylinder began to open, green vapor hissing into the air. A demon of Nurgle emerged, a plague-bearer, its body bloated with disease, its single eye weeping corruption, its rusted blade dripping with contagions that could kill with a scratch. The demon saw Saitama and grinned with broken teeth. It shambled forward, bringing with it the stench of decay, the promise of beautiful entropy. It raised its blade, preparing to gift this strange human with Grandfather Nurgle's blessings. Saitama waited until the demon was close, then flicked it on the forehead. The plague-bearer exploded, not metaphorically. Its physical form simply ceased coherent existence, bursting into fragments that dissolved before hitting the ground. The demon's essence, usually returning to the warp to slowly reform, simply ended. Silence filled the observation chamber. Valdane checked readouts that made no sense. No psychic discharge. No warp disruption. No sacred litanies or holy weapons. Just physical contact and instantaneous termination. Again, he ordered. They released 5 more demons over the next hour. Lesser entities of each chaos god. Bloodletters. Horrors. Plague-bearers, demonettes. Saitama destroyed each one with the same casual efficiency, his expression ranging from bored to mildly disgusted by the smell. After the final test, he turned to the observation glass. "Are we done? Can I go home now?" Valdane didn't answer immediately. His mind was processing implications that terrified him more than any demonic incursion. This human represented a paradigm shift, a crack in the Imperium's fundamental understanding of how reality operated. If they released him, he became an uncontrolled variable in a galaxy that could barely maintain control of known variables. If they kept him, they risked creating an enemy capable of destroying everything they'd built. If they killed him, could they even accomplish it? "Your repatriation," Valdane said slowly, "will require additional authorization. You will remain in protective custody until no." The single word carried unexpected weight. Saitama's expression, usually so easygoing, hardened into something that made every observer instinctively step back. "I've been patient," he continued quietly. "I've let you lock me up, test me, treat me like a criminal even though I haven't done anything wrong. But I'm done waiting. Either help me find my way home, or get out of my way." Valdane made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He opened the chamber doors. "You're free to go, Subject Omeganal. The Imperium will not impede your departure. But understand we cannot help you. We don't know where you came from. We don't have the technology to reverse whatever brought you here. You're trapped in our universe with no obvious way home." Saitama absorbed this information, his frustration fading into something sadder. "So I'm stuck here? Unless you discover a method we cannot conceive of." "Yes." For a long moment, Saitama stood motionless. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay. Then I guess I'll figure it out myself." He walked toward the exit, pausing at the threshold. "For what it's worth, you people seem really stressed. Maybe try to relax sometimes. Stress isn't healthy." And with that profound advice, Saitama walked out of Imperial custody and into the galaxy beyond, leaving behind Inquisitors and Space Marines who would spend years debating whether they'd just made the Kunya's mistake of their careers or the only choice that made sense. The warp does not forgive ignorance. It does not forget insult. And it most certainly does not tolerate entities that exist outside its influence. Saitama's tests, his casual annihilation of demonkind, had sent shockwaves through the Imperium that could not be ignored. The dark gods, whose attention was usually consumed with their endless conflicts and the business of torment, focused their combined will on a single objective: understand or destroy the anomaly. A warp storm began to form, not the natural, chaotic turbulence that constantly roiled through the Imperium, but a directed phenomenon. The four Chaos Gods, in one of their rare moments of cooperation, pooled their power to create a manifestation point, a place where the barrier between material and immaterial would collapse entirely. The target, the system where Saitama had been released. Brother Captain Stern felt it first, his psychic senses screaming warnings that made him stagger mid-stride. "Warp storm forming," he transmitted immediately to the Righteous Condemnation's bridge. "Magnitude unprecedented. Rate of growth exceeds all recorded parameters. It's targeting us?" The Oath of Vigilance, still in orbit around Epsilon Carthage, detected the same phenomena. Inquisitor Valdane watched tactical displays fill with crimson warnings as reality itself began to tear at the seams. "Subject Omeganal has departed the facility," an aide reported, panic creeping into his voice. "He's on the moon's surface, moving toward the planetary perimeter on foot." "Recall him," Valdane ordered. "Now, whatever is coming, it's coming for him, and we're in the blast radius." But they were too late. The warp storm broke through reality like a fist through wet paper. The sky above Epsilon Carthage split open, revealing the nightmare realm beyond. Demons poured through the breach, not the lesser entities Saitama had casually destroyed, but greater demons, princes of their dark gods, beings of such power that their presence alone caused madness in mortal minds. A bloodthirster of Khorne descended on wings of brass and fury, its axe trailing flames that burned reality itself. A lord of change manifested in impossible geometries, its staff crackling with sorcerous power. A great unclean one materialized with wet, bubbling laughter, bringing plagues that killed through walls. A keeper of secrets slithered into existence, its form too beautiful and terrible to safely perceive. The Imperial forces opened fire immediately. Lance batteries from orbit, missile salvos from ground installations. Grey Knights teleported to strategic positions, their psychic might focused on binding rituals that might contain the incursion. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. The demons ignored the Imperial resistance, their attention focused on a single target. They converged on Saitama's position with terrifying coordination, their orders unified by the Dark God's singular focus. Saitama stood on a barren plateau, looking up at the things descending toward him. For the first time since arriving in this universe, his expression showed something other than boredom or mild confusion. He looked concerned. "This place really is dangerous," he said quietly, as if confirming a suspicion he'd be harboring. Around him, reality warped under the demon's presence. The ground cracked. The air screamed. Physics became negotiable. And then Saitama did something he rarely needed to do. He got serious. The Bloodthirster struck first, its axe descending with force enough to split continents. Saitama caught the blade between two fingers, stopping it dead. The demon roared, pouring more strength into the attack, channeling Khorne's infinite fury. Saitama twisted the axe aside and punched the Bloodthirster in the chest. The greater demon exploded backward, its brass armor shattering, its essence fragmenting in ways that shouldn't be possible. It crashed into a mountain range 2 kilometers away, carving a canyon with its impact. The Lord of Change laughed, its voice echoing across multiple timelines simultaneously. "Fascinating. But can you adapt to?" Saitama appeared in front of it, moving faster than perception. "Can you stop talking?" He delivered a casual slap that sent the greater demon spinning into orbit, its crystalline staff shattering into probability fragments. The great unclean one spread its arms, releasing plagues that should have scoured all life from the moon. Saitama held his breath and walked through the miasma completely unaffected, before delivering an uppercut that punched the demon through its own disease cloud and into the stratosphere. The Keeper of Secrets tried seduction, offered experiences beyond imagining, attempted to overwhelm Saitama's senses with its impossible beauty. Saitama looked mildly uncomfortable. "Sorry, I'm not interested." He flicked the demon away like an annoying insect. From orbit, the Imperial forces watched their tactical displays with numb incomprehension. 4 greater demons beings that normally required entire chapters of Space Marines or Inquisitorial armies to banish were being systematically dismantled by a single individual engaging in what could only be described as casual violence. But the warp storm wasn't finished. Something else began to manifest, something larger. A composite entity formed from the combined will of all 4 chaos, gods, an unprecedented creation born of their unified curiosity and fear. It had no name, no classification. It simply was a demon of question, a manifestation of the universe itself asking, "What are you?" The entity descended, its form constantly shifting between aspects of all 4 gods. It radiated power that made the greater demons seem like candles before a sun. It opened mouths that existed in 17 dimensions and spoke in a voice that was pure concept. "Entity, explain yourself." Saitama looked up at this cosmic interrogator and felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. A slight challenge, not danger, not threat. But for the first time since arriving in this universe, he faced something that wasn't immediately, obviously weaker than him. "I'm just a guy who trained really hard," he said simply, "and I want to go home." The demon entity processed this answer and found it insufficient. It attacked with everything: warp fire, reality manipulation, temporal distortion, conceptual warfare. It threw at Saitama the accumulated horrors of the entire Chaos pantheon, techniques that had destroyed civilizations and driven entire species extinct. Saitama weathered the assault, his suit getting progressively more damaged, his expression growing more annoyed. And then, with the methodical frustration of someone who'd tried patience and found it wanting, he jumped. The leap carried him directly to the demon entity's center mass. He pulled back his fist not casually this time, but with actual effort, with the kind of focus he usually reserved for enemies that might possibly, perhaps, present a hint of challenge. Serious punch. The impact didn't destroy the demon. It destroyed the concept of the demon. The entity unraveled, its component parts scattering back to their respective domains in the warp. The unified question literally answered with overwhelming force. The warp storm, suddenly lacking the will that sustained it, collapsed, reality sealed. The tears in Space Steam mended with audible pops. Silence fell across Epsilon Carthage. Saitama landed back on the plateau, examining his torn suit with mild disappointment. That's the second outfit I've ruined this week. From the Oath of Vigilance, Inquisitor Valdane could only stare. His instruments showed readings that would take decades to properly analyze. His fleet had witnessed something that violated every understanding of how the universe functioned. And the bald man responsible was complaining about his clothes. The aftermath of the warp storm sent shockwaves through Imperial command structures across 3 sectors. Reports flooded in contradictory, impossible, yet verified by multiple sources including Grey Knight's testimony. An individual had single-handedly repelled a greater demon incursion and banished a manifestation of the dark gods themselves, the High Lords of Terror, those ancient beings who governed humanity from their throne chambers on mankind's birthworld, convened an emergency session. The discussion lasted 17 hours and concluded with a single unanimous decision. Do nothing, because there was nothing they could do. The entity called Subject Omeganal existed outside every power structure, every classification, every system of control the Imperium had developed over 10,000 years. He could not be threatened, could not be bribed, could not be manipulated or destroyed. More importantly, he showed no interest in governance, worship, or conquest. He just wanted to go home. And so the Imperium made a choice that defined wisdom in the 41st millennium. They let him go. Inquisitor Valdane transmitted the final communication to Saitama via long-range Vox, his message broadcast to the coordinates where the entity had last been detected. Subject Omeganal, the Imperium of Man acknowledges your sovereignty. We cannot aid your search for home, but we will not impede it. Travel where you will. If you encounter threats to Imperial citizens and choose to intervene, such actions will be noted with gratitude. If you do not, we understand. You owe us nothing. Go in peace. The last word tasted foreign in Valdane's mouth. Peace was not a concept the Imperium used comfortably, but it seemed appropriate. Saitama received the message while floating through space above a devastated battlefield, one of the endless wars that consumed the galaxy. Imperial Guard forces locked in combat with Orc raiders over resources that didn't matter in the grand scheme, but meant survival to those fighting. He watched the carnage below with sad eyes. This universe was exhausting. Back home, battles were theatrical, almost fun. Here, everything was real pain, real death, real suffering on scales that made his stomach hurt. He couldn't fix it. Not really. He could punch individual threats, could stop specific disasters, but the systemic horror that defined the 41st millennium, that was beyond even his strength. So he kept moving, drifting through the void, hoping to find some clue, some method, some impossible solution that would tear reality open and send him home. On Scintilla, in the Tricorn Palace, a debate raged that would continue for generations. Some inquisitors called Saitama a miracle, proof that the Emperor still protected humanity in mysterious ways. Others called him a harbinger, a sign that the end times approached when even the laws of reality broke down. Radicals wanted to study the energy signatures he left behind. Puritans wanted all records sealed and classified beyond clearance. The Grey Knights said nothing publicly, but in their fortress monastery on Titan, they added a new entry to their librarium, Demonicon, a demon, but something else, a reminder that the universe was stranger than doctrine allowed, that sometimes the most dangerous thing wasn't evil or corruption, but simple, overwhelming good that the system couldn't accommodate. Brother Captain Stern wrote the entry himself, his stylus scratching across ancient parchment. Subject, Omeganal. Classification, unknown. Threat level, undetermined. Recommendation, leave alone. It is possible, however, improbable that we encountered something the Emperor himself sent to remind us that power without malice exists. That strength can be gentle. That in the grim darkness of the far future, there is not only war, there are also heroes who fight not because they hate what stands before them, but because they love what stands behind them. May we remember this, should we encounter him again. May we have the wisdom not to make him our enemy. Across the galaxy, on a planet whose name Saitama didn't know, he landed in a marketplace. Alien traders and human merchants haggled over goods he didn't recognize. The air smelled of strange spices. Children played in streets that were somehow more peaceful than the battlefields he'd passed. He found what looked like a food vendor and approached with cautious hope. "Excuse me, do you have anything on sale?" The vendor, human woman with augmented eyes and a kind smile, looked at this strange bald customer in a tattered yellow suit. "Everything's on sale, friend. What do you need?" Saitama's face brightened for the first time in days. Really? Do you have premium beef? She laughed. Not beef, but I've got protein from creatures you've never heard of. Good quality. Fair price. You look like you've had a rough journey. You have no idea, Saitama said, genuine exhaustion in his voice. As he haggled over prices for food he might not even recognize, as he tried to navigate currency he didn't understand, as he attempted to live in a universe that made no sense to him, the Imperium of man continued its eternal struggle. Billions died in wars that would never end. Demons plotted in dimensions of screaming madness. Alien horrors descended from the dark between stars. The Emperor rotted on his throne while his servants committed atrocities in his name. And somewhere in the vastness of it all, a single man in a yellow suit searched for a way home, occasionally stopping to punch threats that threatened the innocent, never asking for thanks, never seeking glory, just trying to find a supermarket sale. The 41st millennium had encountered something it had no framework for: genuine, uncomplicated heroism, power without ambition, strength without corruption. Some saw it as hope, a sign that even in the darkest timeline, light could exist. Others saw it as tragedy, proof that goodness was alien to this universe, that it could only arrive from outside, and that even when it came, it couldn't stay. Both were probably right. As Saitama walked through that alien marketplace, his torn suit drawing curious glances, his bald head reflecting unfamiliar suns, he wondered if he'd ever see his own apartment again, ever catch another sale, ever find an opponent who made him feel truly alive. Behind him, the Imperium watched and wondered. Ahead of him, the galaxy stretched out in infinite hostile beauty. And above him, in the warp, 4 dark gods observed with unprecedented interest, wondering the same thing Saitama wondered. What happens next? The answer, as always in the 41st millennium, was simple. Whatever must,